Hi, Tiger Craven Neely. I'm a retired school teacher, California, 15 years in the closet, 15 years out. And I'm retired, and I'm not paid for this. These are not professional videos, obviously. Not professional lighting, not professional editing. I am sharing a book that you can read in the LGBT class, book to your students, excuse me. Sharing about personal experiences and about California laws. This video, I just want to focus on some laws and my experiences working in Modesto City Schools. So first of all, some of the things I'm sharing are about my disagreements with the administration. In my opinion, there was never a court or jury that said they were harassing me. It was just my opinion. I did file a lawsuit, lasted for 4 or 5 years. We settled out of court. I want to say that as we were wrapping up and settling out of court, my lawyer said, you know, you can talk about these things in public in the video because out of the Me Too movement came out laws that are banning non-disclosure agreements, giving freedom for those who were harassed. And I feel like I was harassed. So I have those freedoms. One law is the Silence No More Act 2022. And even before that, there were laws protecting whistleblowers and those who are standing up for LGBT rights. In my experience, I felt like the administrators, I'm going to name them, Craig Ridquist, Marla Mack, Michelle Gutierrez, Kim Newton, Shanton Fee, were the main conspirators, this is the word I'm using, that were targeting me for being an out homosexual in the classroom in a public school. In my opinion, they were trying to make Modesto into a private, like a Christian school district when it was public, required to follow public laws, and I was following Senate Bill 48. I was following the guidelines and the history, social studies frameworks, Chapter 20 on equity and access, following guidelines, Assembly Bill 329. Mike Henderson, Stephen Boucher were more, they were also named in my lawsuit, they were more bystanders watching these things happen. In my opinion, you shouldn't be complicit. If you're in a role of leadership and you're watching other people harass, you should speak up. Stephen Boucher also wrote a report. In my opinion, it was extremely misleading and defaming of my name, probably because he was trying to protect his job. Those are just my opinion. Just want to review before I go into my sharing mainly about Assembly Bill 329 and my experience trying to defend that in Modesto. Just a reminder of here's some guidelines in the history social studies framework. It reminds us that we are teaching and protecting all of California school children, including the LGBT kids. Here are some guidelines. It says to be a culturally responsive teacher, we want to fill in the gaps and go beyond the standards. I remember I mentioned Harvey Milk, and I got harassed about it by an administrator saying, Harvey Milk's not in the standards. No, the framework says we give examples of culturally diverse beyond the standards. The standards are the minimum, not the maximum. Here's some other characteristics. Exude a positive disposition toward diversity. Censoring, ignoring the LGBT laws like Senate Bill 48 is not exuding a positive disposition. Recognize cultural and experiential backgrounds in your classrooms. Here's another fill in the gaps. But in the things you have, in the materials you have in your classrooms, in the posters, in the bulletin boards, in the songs, the supplementary materials, the books, the literature, the images, the art, have your LGBT kids represented in those things. I remember I had books on my whiteboard. I got harassed about it. The principal's trying to say, why do you have those things? Like, well, you're not bothering me about, I went into a classroom and the teacher had a library on African American people, which is appropriate. And then I had a few books on LGBT people and following this guideline, having diversity, the LGBT group represented in my classroom, and I was being harassed. Other guidelines, increase students' access to inclusive curriculum like Senate Bill 48, make available and share age-appropriate literature that reflects the diversity of humankind, which is what I was doing with my LGBT books. Teach students by example through discussion. Have discussions with your students, how to treat diverse others. So one of my students said things like, excuse the language, faggot or homo in the classroom. That was a time to have a discussion. When I said I was getting married to a nice gentleman and they went, oh, he's gay. That was a time to have a discussion. California students who are not themselves in this population may have parents or guardians or coworkers or classmates or employees or employers who are. And we all need to feel safe. I think I shared a story the other day of teaching 7th grade and having my LGBT lesbian friend's son in the classroom, as well as another trans friend's sister in my classroom. So if they're not LGBT in the classroom, they have family members who are. So the story I wanted to share about is regarding Assembly Bill 329. 329 says in California, you don't have to teach sex ed in grades 4, 5, and 6, but you do in middle school once a year and in high school once a year. In my case, the administration sent out an email, fall of 2015, saying we are going to update the Assembly Bill 329, the sex ed curriculum, and they wanted volunteers. I volunteered. I said, I'm gay. I want to make sure the Assembly Bill 329 is represented in our updates. Well, they snubbed me. They totally ignored me. I did send an email. I said, if you're not going to put me on the committee, at least focus on suicide prevention for LGBT kids, because I'm reading more and more these alarming statistics, like the Center for Disease Control and Prevention are coming out with saying LGBT kids are more prone to suicide attempts, like 3 or 4 times more than the non-LGBT. I was told, this was Marla Mack, she shot back, she said, we already have a suicide prevention program. I said, well, yeah, but it doesn't focus on LGBT. Now here's an offshoot, like Black Lives Matter. They came out and said, all lives matter, but during that time in our history, I agree. It was important to say Black Lives Matter. It was important to focus on the atrocities to the African American community. Some of it went overboard, this whole political ideology thing I don't want to get into. Some of it went overboard, I think, and went into, very political, very controversial. But there were parts of it I agree to, like the Black Lives Matter. It was important to focus on the atrocities, making sure the atrocities toward Black people ended in our society. Same with this. I was saying for suicide prevention, it's important that we focus on LGBT. She said, we already have suicide prevention. Well, that season, 2015, we had an LGBT girl at the high school, non-gender conforming. She was the only girl on the wrestling team, only girl on the football team. She was flirting with another girl, which is what high school students do. And that other girl overreacted and called her names. There was a physical skirmish. The Modesto City Schools administration involuntarily transferred the non-gender conforming girl. She went home in a tragedy, and my condolences to the family. She went home, she took her life. And my point is that if they would have been implementing Assembly Bill 329 that teaches the negative aspects of gender stereotyping, maybe that student would be with us today. And I've already given this example of Ronan Shimizu, condolences to their family, his family as well. A 12-year-old near Sacramento who designed his own clothes, was the only male cheerleader, was harassed, ended up taking his own life. But if they would have implemented Assembly Bill 329, teaching the negative aspects of gender stereotyping, maybe Ronan would be with us today. So that was one tragedy in the fall of 2015 for the school district not implementing and recognizing and snubbing me as well. I want to fast forward to 2017, I filed a complaint with the Department of Education. I said, Modesto City Schools is not following the guidelines of Assembly Bill 329. Now let me be more specific. Again, the law says you have to teach sex education, HIV prevention, STI prevention, including abstinence in grades in the middle school once a year and in high school once a year. However, you do not have to teach sex ed in 4, 5, and 6. But if you do, you have to adhere to the law. By the way, quick offshoot is I called the California Department of Education regarding this law, and I asked them, I said, I noticed the ACLU says teachers have to follow these guidelines, and on the Department of Education website, it says teachers may follow these guidelines. That's a big difference. That's what may means choice, must means it's a requirement. ACLU versus the Department of Education. They sent me to the go-to person in California who kept accountable all the districts in California regarding their sex education. I asked her, she said, I don't know. I know, that's a red flag right there. She said, I don't know. It had been a law for a couple of years, and she didn't know if it was a requirement for teachers in grades 4, 5, and 6 to make sure that law was implemented. She obfuscated. She said, let me look into it, talk to my lawyers, I'll get back to you. She never did. She never did. These are concerning things. This was California. That was 2017. I spoke with her. Go-to person in California. ACLU saying you must. Department of Education saying you may, which is a choice. And she didn't even know, which meant she certainly wasn't enforcing it. So I filed this complaint with the EEUCPO, Education Equity Uniform Complaint Procedures Office in the Department of Education, saying Modesto City Schools is not following the guidelines in grades 4, 5, and 6. When you do that, when you file a complaint, that means the LEA, local education agency, or school district, has to respond to me, and they have to send a copy to the EEUCPO office, who's now going to regulate and keep the school district accountable. So Modesto responded to me. It was really obfuscating. It was really subterfuge. And they came back with really nonsensical information. They said, well, Assembly Bill was written this year, and this is what it says, but no response to why they weren't teaching it. The Department of Education, EEUCO office, they responded January, it was around January 28th, I think, 2018, they gave me a response, Modesto City Schools. They said, we are agreeing with Mr. C that you're not following the law. The same day, Michelle Gutierrez's office called me. They said, we want to come in, bring you in and have you talk to one of our lawyers. So I came in, the lawyer grilled me. I thought it was Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s. The lawyer said, did you tell your students you were going to teach them about LGBT issues? This was retaliation on Michelle Gutierrez's part for me standing up for LGBT laws. To the lawyer, I said, I said, are you going to ask the African-American teacher if she said she was going to teach her students about African-American people? Because if you're not, you're discriminating against me, which is true. Which was true. So, and I did tell my students, as I shared with you before, I told them about getting married, I told them about Senate Bill 48. Don't be surprised if they hear a couple of me share about Harvey Milk or Maurice Sendak or about gay marriage when we talked about judicial review. So anyway, Modesto City Schools had to respond. So their second response, they sent it out, I think around March. They said, well, we're not teaching sex ed in grades 4, 5, and 6. We're teaching something totally different called family life. So the Department of Education sent me a letter around April saying Modesto City Schools has fulfilled their requirement. They gave us a sufficient response. We're closing the case. The same day I got the response from the Department of Education siding with Modesto City Schools. Michelle Gutierrez calls me up. She says, we're going to give you that 5th grade position you were asking for. I was asking to switch from 6th to 5th. This was a reward for them getting what they wanted from the State Department of Education. Well, I appealed the decision. I asked the Department of Education, may I appeal? They said yes. So I sent them characteristics of Modesto City Schools sex education in grades 4, 5, and 6. I had taught it for 10 years, along with the characteristics of Assembly Bill 329, comprehensive sex education, what they consider comprehensive sex education, and they matched. And then the Department of Education came out with an adjustment to their decision. they said to Michelle Gutierrez, we are opening the case back up. We're agreeing with Mr. C. You are not teaching to Assembly Bill 329. A couple of days later, guess what? Michelle Gutierrez contacts me. Last time she contacted me, she said, we're going to give you that 5th grade position. This time she calls me up and says, actually it was a letter. So we're transferring you to a different school. And here are the reasons why. Because you talked about gay marriage in your classroom. Because you shared too much of your personal life. Because you talked about LGBT people. You mentioned Harvey Milk. They even said you talked about the 4 genders. I don't even know what the 4 genders are, but that's what they were accusing me of doing. It was harassment, retribution. Regardless of the harassment, they had to respond a 3rd time. So their 3rd response, and before I tell you, I'm going to tell you in the fall of 2017, I think the video is on my YouTube site. My husband and I came and presented to the school board about Assembly Bill 329 and Senate Bill 48 and about the History Social Studies framework. One of the things I shared at the school board meeting, I said, there was a grandparent who came to my 3rd grade classroom. He's African American, and he shared about discrimination. He said when he was growing up in Mississippi, the government told the city they had to integrate their swimming pool, and instead of allowing the black children and white children to swim together, they buried the swimming pool. And I used that as a metaphor. I said, please don't bury the swimming pool in Modesto. Here are the laws requiring you to present sex ed curriculum that represents LGBT. And I even gave them an example. I said, this is what I'd like to be able to say in my classroom. It's very simple, something like this. Boys and girls, the curriculum we're studying says that at a certain time you may experience attractions to the opposite gender. For some of you, that might not happen. You might experience an attraction to the same gender. If that's you, if you're a boy, that's called being gay. If you're a girl, it's called being lesbian. Just want to tell you, don't panic. There's nothing bad about you. You're not bad. You're not evil. By the way, that's what society says. I said, and if that's not you, we don't tease. Remember, we don't tease people who are. We show respect to everyone. So I gave them an example. Well, I got a response from Modesto. Their 3rd response was around September 2018. They said, dear Mr. C, in response to your complaint, school board has decided to no longer teach sex education in grades 4, 5, and 6. Can you believe that? They buried the swimming pool. They shut down sex educations in Modesto City Schools. At least that's what they said they were doing. What's interesting is about a year later, 1 or 2 years later, I was at a coffee shop and I overheard these 2 women talking about working at Modesto City Schools. And I said, excuse me, I hope you don't mind me interjecting. And it was a coffee shop that was known for having LGBT people there. So I assumed that maybe they were a lesbian couple. And I said, excuse me. And I explained to them my experience with Modesto City Schools. And it ended up, we had a conversation, and they were a lesbian couple, and they worked for Modesto City Schools. I said, they didn't know whether or not the curriculum was really being taught or not. They knew nothing about that. But I said, do you feel comfortable being out of the closet in your classroom? They said, oh, no. No. We fear harassment. We feel like we would be harassed if we were open about our sexual orientation, which is a shame. Which means they felt shamed. And they felt like there'd be repercussions if they were themselves in the classroom. And what does that say to the children who are discovering that they're LGBT? Anyway, I talked a lot. Just want to end with my favorite quote. It's the only perverse thing about homosexuality is society's insane inability to accept human nature. It's just human nature. It's like being left-handed. We're not choosing to be gay. If you're not choosing to be gay, why be punished for it? Why be punished for it? I was discovering in 3rd grade, I had a crush on a guy, knew I was different. I think I was 17 when I finally realized, oh my goodness, I think I'm homosexual. I think I'm what my classmates call faggot in the locker room. I felt ashamed. Anyway, stand up for your kids. If you're gay, be out of the closet. Don't be ashamed. Be a good role model for your students. Thank you for listening.